You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on. Hello and welcome to Mamamia Out Loud. It's what women are actually talking about on Wednesday, the 1st of November. I'm Holly Wainwright.
I'm Mia Freedman.
And I'm Clare Stevens.
And it's your last show, Clare Stevens.
It is, but I keep telling myself, you know, Jessie will fall over and break her leg.
Oh, she's already done that.
Or she'll have a bad day and she'll be like, I can't make it. And I'll be
So
like, guys,
true.
I'm still here.
It's
Don't
pretty
worry.
funny, the exchanging of the baton for mat leave.
It is. It's great.
I
But
will
yes,
still be around for a few weeks, still recording some other stuff.
You will.
So you may hear me, and if not, I'll just be tapping on the door being like, guys, what talking about?
I have a thought. Listen to my opinion.
well, we'll embarrass you more about this later, but thank you, Clare Stevens, for all the wonderful work you've done on the show today. The celebrity who's got the world's biggest vulnerability hangover. Put your damn phone away and focus on your food. And is your workplace seething with psychopaths and sociopaths, or does it just feel like it? But first, Clare Stevens.
In case you missed it, when it comes to sleep, we're all idiots, except for the Scandinavians.
Mm-hmm.
There's something called the Scandi sleeping method, and I feel like whenever you put Scandi in front of something, it just
Makes it
automatically makes it cooler, more aspirational. But it involves partners sleeping in the one bed but having two separate blankets, which means two happy and comfortable sleepers. So apparently it's a tradition found all over Scandinavia and in Germany and Austria, which also seems quite exotic.
So like you have a double bed, but you have two single doonas?
Exactly.
Or two
Yes.
blankets vertical ways?
Yeah, which is like together but separate vibes. And it turns out that even the idea of sharing a bed is relatively recent in human history, and it was originally just a thing poor people did because they had to out of necessity, not because it's a natural thing or because we sleep well when we do it. And now it's seen as a prerequisite of romantic life with a partner, even though it's been shown to increase sleep disturbances, and then sleep disturbances lead to divorce. Guys, we all need the Scandi sleeping method. And so this writer for Refinery 29 wrote about the experience of the two blankets, one bed sleeping arrangement, and basically said, for example, if you're sharing a double bed with your partner and you have a kid in a single bed, you probably have less room. If you're in a double bed, if you halved that, your little kid in their bloody single bed has more room than you do.
Oh, I
yeah.
see.
And that's why we're all so bloody uncomfortable. And so at least having two blankets gives you the sense that you can control your temperature, you can control when you wiggle around in the bed, and you're not disturbed by your annoying
That's true,
partner.
because it's very rare to have the same temperature as whoever you're sleeping in a bed with.
I've always done this. I didn't know I was so Scandi. We always have two covers on the bed. And also because, I shouldn't say this because people will at me, but our dog sleeps on the bed.
Yeah.
We always had a kid sleeping in the bed, and now we don't have a kid sleeping in the bed. We have a dog who often sleeps on the bed. So otherwise you're just constantly pulling for the covers. So we always have two covers on the bed. I didn't know I was so
Does the
Scandinavian
dog
and
sleep
chic.
between you or at the end of
If
the bed?
she gets her own way, she sleeps right in between us with her head on the pillow.
You have no boundaries.
That's a staffy.
I wake
Yep.
up in the morning sometimes and her face is in my face and she's like, hi, licks my nose.
This is why dogs have anxiety.
I know.
There was an article written for Slate that caught our eye this week. It was called Britney Spears is giving us a tour of her personal life. I hope she's prepared. It's by a writer and a psychiatrist called Jessie Gold, and it's about the aftermath of something she describes as self-disclosure. Because last week when Britney's memoir was released, we all got a very intimate look at her life over the past 20 years, and it really was not pretty. We learned about how she had to pretend she was a virgin for years to keep her record label happy, how she had an abortion and she had really mixed feelings about that, how she wasn't allowed to seek the medical attention that she wanted while she was having that abortion at home, her heartbreak and her humiliation after Justin Timberlake dumped her, and all the ugly details of her 13 years under a conservatorship. It was a lot, and none of it was news to Britney because she lived it, of course. But having the world know about your pain after any kind of self-disclosure like this is a whole other thing, and it can trigger an entirely different range of emotions. Jessie Gold writes, As a mental health professional, I know how big of a deal it is to be so vulnerable in public. Sharing a mental health experience or a hardship like a pregnancy loss is called self-disclosure. You can self-disclose to a friend or family member or to the whole world. When it involves deeply personal details, though, it is far from easy and should be done with care. The aftermath of self-disclosure can include any emotion from joy to sadness to grief and anger. And it also has the potential to make anyone re-experience and even be re-traumatized by events of the past. Now, it's impossible to know what Britney's going through, but she has posted on Instagram last week when the story about her abortion was leaked, how she was really upset and sort of shocked about people reacting. And she said, "My book's purpose was not to offend anyone by any means. That was me then, and that's in the past, and I don't like the headlines I'm reading." So she was obviously coping with everyone's opinion about her life and her past. Now, Claire, you and I both host podcasts where people tell us very personal things that they've often never spoken about before, but Are You Happy and No Filter. And this isn't just about celebrities because, you know, anyone that discusses something, whether it's on social media or discloses it to a friend or a partner, what have you learned about the way people feel afterwards and about that vulnerability hangover?
So the interesting thing about self-disclosure is that in a traditional sense, relationships are built on mutual self-disclosure. And that's how you become increasingly close to somebody. And it's why when you initially meet somebody and they say something really, really personal and out there, you can get a bit like, ooh, standoffish about it because you haven't reached that level of intimacy yet.
And you're not necessarily ready to disclose the same.
Exactly.
Maybe that's why I freak people out all the time.
I think it probably is, you know, like with all the love in the world. This is a stereotype, but I remember being a young woman, like 21, and I lived in England and I went to America, and the way that a lot of Americans would immediately tell you a lot of really personal things really quickly when you met them really freaked me out. Like I'd be on a bus and somebody would be like, yeah, and then my mother died and then this happened and then da-da-da. And I'm just
not
like,
very British.
No, like we're not friends. Like this is strange.
Because the way we build relationships with people is that I disclose something, you disclose something of a similar vulnerability level, and then I go a bit further and you go a bit further, and it's all kind of a bit of a test, like you're testing the waters.
Yeah.
Is that why in the first episode of But Are You Happy, you set the table by being very vulnerable about your own feelings about times that you were meant to be happy and about jealousy and about all the things? Is that why you did that? So that other people could feel disarmed and that you'd come to the table?
Yeah. So I wanted people to feel like they were talking to somebody who had done the same thing I was asking of them. Like I was very, very conscious that you're asking people to be really, really honest about things that might not seem likable all the time and that they might have some hesitation talking about. But I think I really wanted to kind of set that tone for the show. It's hard because the way that, you know, our idea of fame has developed in terms of the people that I interview on But Are You Happy and social media has developed is that now it's more of a one-way path. However, Mia, I'm sure you've noticed this, and Holly as well, that when you share something, you'll notice how many people come to you with their own self-disclosures because they think, oh, yes, you've disclosed, I can disclose.
And what do you think about that? Holly, you and Claire have both, and I have all disclosed things in our writing or on podcasts. And it's true, people who've had similar experiences will come at you in waves. Do you find that reassuring, or is that then overwhelming?
I really get a lot out of it. I don't know if that's necessarily normal. The amount of people who have reached out and have eerily similar experiences to you and want to talk about it. The thing I worry about is when people ask me for advice because I'm like, oh, I don't have any. I don't have any of this sorted. I'm not at the end of a journey where I can tell you what to do. What do you think, Holly?
As we all know, working in the world we work in, when you do it this well and right, it's enormously helpful. So, Mia, when you spoke about your miscarriage more than 10 years ago, and there wasn't an enormous amount of public information out there about women sharing that particular grief, that's enormously helpful. There is a phrase that you use all the time as a bedrock of Mamamia, which we're not sure who actually said it first.
Wasn't me.
Which is there's someone out there with a wound in the shape of your words. And it's absolutely true. But I worry that we have now got a bit of a culture, like it's almost table stakes. In order for me to trust and engage with you, you have to do that. And for any high-profile person to get a headline, get an interview, get a cover, get a story, they have to bring some grief to the table.
Lots of self-disclosure.
And I worry that it becomes really self-defining. And I think this is also true, like not just about public people, but in our friend groups, is that if you're open and about a grief or a loss or a terrible thing that's happened to you, and then that comes to define you. I have a family member whose partner took his own life, for example. She was very much like, that's the first thing anyone thinks about when they look at me. Oh, you're so-and-so, and that thing happened to you. And she said, I wish that everybody in the world didn't know that and I could choose to share it on my own terms, right? And I think that sometimes in our rush to be vulnerable and likable and make other people feel better because we're all going through things, you can then come to be defined by your worst moment or your worst feeling. I remember and this is a silly thing, not a big serious thing, because serious things that I've disclosed about miscarriage, about mental health, about different things, I don't have any regrets about them because they were well considered. But you know, when we were talking years ago, and this is obviously touches on what your podcast is about, Clare, and the conversation you had, and I said about how I was jealous about Jesse's book deal, and everyone was like, oh, so brave of you to say that. That's so great that you said that. Well done. And then the number of people who, whenever I mention Jessie in their presence, are like, oh, yeah, like you're really jealous of her, aren't you?
I have no memory of you saying that.
I remember.
Everybody does. And the thing is no, that is not the defining experience of my relationship with Jessie.
It was a fleeting thought.
It was, it was a moment in time where I was obviously wrestling with my own values about success and seeing someone who's close to me achieve something so amazing. Like, it's true to be honest to discuss that, but it is not the bedrock defining thing about our relationship. I have so much joy for Jessie and I've worked through that shit. And I think that when I hear, whether it's on But Are You Happy, which I love, or The Imperfects, which I love, sometimes I think, oh, now every time I see that person, all I think about is, oh, you don't like this or that or this. Or like Elizabeth Day, right? How to Fail host, who has spoken really openly and very thoughtfully about her struggle to have a child. And that's such a gift to so many people. But there's a bit of me that is almost sad that such a really accomplished woman, now a lot of what she puts out into the world, what people talk about around it is, I wonder if she's going to have a baby yet. I wonder if she's adopting. I wonder if she's going through fertility. She's that one who wants to have a baby, and it comes to define
so
you.
This is why it is always better. The other saying, which I also didn't make up, but use all the time, is this is why it's better to write from a scar, not a wound, or to self-disclose. And look, it's different what we're talking about because we're people in the public eye who essentially turn our self-disclosure into content. For other people, it might be disclosing something to a friend or a therapist or a loved one that is really personal and private. So it's slightly different because then you're not talking about the whole world's opinion on what you've disclosed. But you do have a degree of control on that. And I've counselled people in my life who have self-disclosed about something that's happened to them. And then they've been asked, will you do this interview? Will you be the spokesperson for this? And there's a real crossroads where you can either choose to keep self-disclosing about that issue and engage with all the people who want to talk to you about it, or you can say, I spoke about it. I'm sort of done speaking about it. I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen, but I don't want to keep speaking about it. And that's essentially what Britney's saying. She's drawing a boundary. She said, I wanted to get my story out there, but I didn't really want to have a conversation or engage in a conversation about all of those things that I've disclosed.
I mean, I think with But Are You Happy, for instance, the idea of why you're sharing something. And I think that's a bit of a defining feature of whether that self-disclosure is going to cause issues for you or not. Even with But Are You Happy, I say to every guest, like, you'll leave and you'll spend the next 24 hours convinced you said things you didn't say, cringing at everything, wanting to kill the interview. The amount of emails, voice notes, phone calls I've got from people afterwards being like, can you cut this? Can you cut this? And we are incredibly accommodating with people because it is obviously a mental health podcast and we do not want things on there that's going to be distressing to people. But I do say you're going to imagine things and you're going to hate yourself because you've been vulnerable. And I think it's about why you share it, because in the context of that podcast, what we're trying to get across is that if you are successful and you're living your life in a public way, things look amazing, and they're not. That's the simple kind of premise of it. They're not always amazing. Things are more complex than they seem. Whereas if there is kind of not an ulterior motive, but interestingly in the first episode of But Are You Happy, I spoke to Michelle Andrews and Zara McDonald from Shameless. Michelle talked about in the first book, she wrote a chapter about sexual assault and she hadn't told her family about it and she hadn't told most people in her life about it. And she said in hindsight, she felt like as a woman, in order to have any right to release a book as a woman, you had to share the worst thing that had ever happened to you.
Yeah, I was really, really moved by that.
Yeah, and in hindsight, she was like, I don't know why I shared that. And Hugh Van Cuylenberg, in his episode, talked about sharing some stuff about his sister and her experience that he realised wasn't really his to share.
I said, yeah, this is what my sister's been through. And we've had a couple of conversations where she's like, I don't mind you talking about what I've been through, but I want to be consulted. Like, I never talked to her about it because I think it was too hard to talk to her about her mental ill health. So I just didn't. I just was like, oh, I'll put the story together. Yeah, this is good. I should be happy with this, and never asked her. I have a lot of regret around that. I just wish so much. I sat down with her and said, if you're comfortable, let's share your story with the world in a way that you are really comfortable with.
So I think it's an ongoing journey where people learn the limits of what to share and what not to. But I think that actually thinking about why you're sharing it and the scar, not a wound, I think is really important. But also, are you sharing it because you feel like you have to? I can often feel like sometimes if I'm defensive or like getting attacked or something like that, that I want to be like, but I'm going through this thing and it's really hard. And I'm like, no, never do that.
But
never
isn't that
do
because in our culture at the moment, certainly on the left, it's like show us your trauma. You know, to have the right to say anything, you have to prove that you're not as privileged as you seem from the outside. So
and
everyone's self-disclosing disclosing all over the place.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because even, and I know we've discussed this before, Claire, but even this idea that like everybody's life looks perfect, it's not just a thing about celebrities. The amount of friends I have who are like, well, obviously so-and-so's marriage is perfect and look at them and what have they got to complain about? And they don't, nothing bad ever happens to them. Haven't we all lived long enough to know? Why can't we just sort of walk through the world with the assumption that like everybody has got shit happening in their lives at different degrees? You know what I mean? And that everybody's life will have seen some shit. You don't have to show me your bruises and scars for me to believe you. Because really what this is about is it's a result of comparison culture. It's the idea that if my relationship is terrible and I look over there and see that couple laughing, then like I'm immediately like, look at them. They don't have any problems and it's not fair because I have all these problems. But those people have problems too. Why can't we just like have a more evolved awareness of what people are going through without people having to wear badges that say, my life's shit just like yours?
But I think particularly
I want one of those badges.
Particularly now, we don't have that aware. Like I don't, especially, and I totally get what you mean. I think it's a bit of a generational thing that like the more life experiences you have, the more you realize that. But I think particularly, and with But Are You Happy, our core audience is Gen Z. And I think it's incredibly important to show that narrative to them.
Absolutely expose that.
Yeah.
Outlouders, stay tuned. We'll be updating you on our new line of merch saying my life is shit just like yours. There will be badges, there will be T-shirts. It's all coming.
I want a hat.
Speaking of self-disclosure, a few years ago, I was out to dinner with a friend of mine and the main got delivered and it looked amazing. And I pulled out my phone and my friend said to me, if you take a picture of your food, I am walking out.
Oh.
Shots fired.
I know. And respect to my friend, my sensible, no bullshit friend. Fast forward 5 years, and I do still occasionally take photos of my food, but so does everybody else at the table. It's like, this isn't like if you're just having a sandwich, but if you go to we're going out for dinner.
What do you do with those photos?
Well, often I don't do anything with it. Sometimes I'll send it to someone who might be interested.
So you don't post them publicly?
Well, I might post them publicly if
in a
it
photo
was a
dump.
highlight in a photo dump or something. Rarely. I'm not really a food
A lot of
blogger,
people put
but
it on like their Instagram
Yeah, their
stories with some
stories.
cool music.
Yeah.
It becomes a vibe.
Yeah.
That's boring to me.
And I get it, right? But everybody's doing it now. And we're talking about it because a restaurant in Brooklyn in New York, and certainly not only this restaurant, but they made news this week because they have banned, and it's a very good-looking restaurant, they have banned influencers' phones and laptops from their premises. They're just like, no, you are not. The owner said people were coming in and literally doing photo shoots. They'd get one drink and stay for 2 hours shooting. It's a free-for-all. No one's regulating the TikTokers. I didn't want to be a place where people just come and go for the trend. I regret we didn't do this from the beginning, but I didn't know it was going to get to this level. So I have a few questions.
Is that a humble brag?
It
I
totally
know.
is, right?
We're so good. People just want us for content.
I know.
They're trying to be a restaurant.
It totally is. And I think we talked about a while ago that I went to this posh restaurant in Sydney once where they do take your phone and they put it in a pouch and they lock it in a little cupboard.
That feels
And
controlling.
You have to go and get it back at the end. Please, miss, can I have my phone? But here's my question, right? Once upon a time, a restaurant used to know when a reviewer was coming in, or like high-end restaurant reviewers would actually go in disguise to like kind of, but in the industry, they'd all know. They'd be like, oh, that's the name that so-and-so
They'd have
always
photos of them
uses,
stuck up in the kitchen.
and stuff. But now, anyone who walks in and take a picture of your food, they could be a food influencer with hundreds of thousands of followers, or they could just be somebody who wants to take a picture for their mum. Isn't the theory of hospitality that everyone who walks in should be treated as if they're special, like they might be the one with hundreds of thousands of followers? And is that part of the problem? Clare Stevens.
There's often stories online about, an influencer reached out to stay at this hotel or to go to this restaurant, and we're going to publicly shame them and say what they asked for and share the email that they sent, whatever. I find that so uncomfortable because it completely misses the reality of what advertising has become. Like, that's just how marketing works. Like, influencers is how it works. And if you're not engaging with influencers, that's fine, but you kind of have to agree that that's a big part of the industry now. But I do think that it's a big part of hospitality, this idea. I remember working at Boost Juice and you had your secret shoppers. You had your secret shopper. And,
Your secret
and they
shoppers.
would they would turn up and you'd
Apparently
be...
that's a good side hustle, being a secret shopper.
Yeah, I know. I'm like,
a
Especially
secret
if you
shopper.
look really normal.
I actually am.
No, you couldn't be a secret.
No, I actually am.
but you're so
How could
conspicuous.
you be?
Because I have a friend that works at a clothing label and I had some feedback for her. Some unsolicited feedback. And I said, I know you haven't asked for this, but here's my feedback. And she's like, I love feedback. Please, will you be my mystery shopper? And I'm like, I will take on that responsibility.
gosh.
Yes, I will.
Like working at Boost Juice, I was like 16 and I was working at my 65% energy level and not giving much of a shit. And there would be a secret shopper and then you get feedback and they'd be like, she was served by the blonde girl. And I'm like, God damn it, that was me. And you'd get all this feedback about your service and how you stuffed up the drink and all of that. And so I think this idea that anybody can be reviewing your restaurant at any time is not a bad thing. I think it's very important that we treat everybody like they are the mini celebrity that they could be.
Main character energy.
Yeah.
I think you're both right because I think that, yes, it's completely self-defeating to not allow people to take pictures of your food and post about it and tag you because, duh, why would you not? But I think what this particular restaurant's complaining about is these people aren't ordering any food. They're just using it for a backdrop while they're probably doing their beauty influencing. They're probably like unpacking their makeup bag on the table and doing a get ready with me while they have one lemonade on the table.
You're not wrong, right? Because when I was looking at this, there's this restaurant in Taipei in Taiwan that's put this new list of rules out that made me go, oh, this is what we're dealing with here. So they've got a list of rules for influencers that say no standing on chairs for photo taking, no taking photos with other customers' meals. So this is clearly what people are dealing with. It's not necessarily that you bring me my entree and I get my phone out. Although if I did that, if we were out for dinner, Mia, would you think I was being a dick?
No, I would just think that's going to be really boring content.
But it's like not people just doing that, but they're literally, as you say, like moving. Oh, I really need a good angle on this. I'm going to stand on my chair. Oh, I really need a good angle on this. I'm going to put it over there. Put it next to that lady. Put it next to that. Like that is.
Do you know what it does?
Cool.
Yeah, no, I get that. And it's the being disruptive to the actual service and running of the restaurant without helping the restaurant in any way. The other thing that it does when you take a photo of it, I think we spoke about this a few weeks ago, this idea of that director who has a no phone rule on his set. What it does is that it leaches energy away from the interaction.
Yeah.
So if you and I were having dinner together, Hol, and you took your phone out to take a photo, that would break the connection and the energy that we have, and it would diffuse it out to you thinking, right, I'm going to do this and I'm going to post it. Even if you post it later, it means that you're kind of not present. And I know that we're often not present, and often if someone's telling a boring story, you're thinking about something else. But I like to pretend that the person is really engaged and really present.
I don't like the idea of judging people for whatever they are doing in a restaurant or bar or whatever. I mean, maybe if they were going to the toilet on a seat, like, yes, that is inappropriate and unhygienic. But, like, I don't like the policing of you can't take photos and you can't bring a laptop. And if somebody's paying to be there.
Well, no, they can't stand on your furniture and disrupt other people's meals. Like, imagine if you're then eating and someone just comes over and goes, can I just take a photo with your clam linguine? And you're like, can you go away?
I'd say no, and that would be absolutely fine. But there's a cafe that I used to go to a lot, and I would get a coffee and maybe some food, and I would sit there and work from there.
Yeah, I like working from cafes
and
too.
then they put a freaking sign up saying
but
you're not allowed to work from there.
These are businesses. So how do you expect them to make any money?
But don't you think, Mia, that's because I used to love to write in cafes. I probably still do, but I don't do it very much. But there's like a social contract you have with that place where I go, if I'm going to do that, I have to order food. I have to order a coffee. If I'm going to stay a bit longer, I have to order another one. Like I'm not just going to sit here and order nothing. And then you have to have a time limit in your head, right? If you're going to stay more than an hour, then
And also, if the restaurant's
busy,
full, if it's busy, you can't. Or if you're taking up a table for four, or the social contract is don't be a dick.
I just think most people are socially aware. I don't believe that this restaurant has been overrun by purely influencers who only want to order one drink and take a photo of it. I just think most people are normal, and this is probably just a publicity thing to say we're so fancy people couldn't stop taking photos on our premises.
I want to throw one thing to the out louders, because when we were talking about this in the office, one of our colleagues had a great hack that she and her friends do to stop them from, as you say, Mia, like leeching away during a meal. And I want to know what out louders think and if they've got any. She said if she's having dinner with her girlfriends, they all put their phones in the middle of the table face down. And if anyone reaches for it before the bill is paid, that person has to pay for dinner for everybody.
Oh, I love that.
Tell us out loud.
I do love that.
Have you got similar rules in your world for stopping all this snapping?
Excuse me, waiter? You probably recognize me, but my name's Ashley. I have a bit of a social media presence. Some would even call me an influencer. Anyways, I saw you left a check while I was using the restroom, and I wanted to come up and see if maybe I could get my meal for free if I posted like a cool story about your restaurant. If you think about it, the exposure and the value from a story of mine would be worth so much more than just me paying for my meal.
Mamamia out loud!
If you want to make Mamamia out loud part of your routine 5 days a week, we release segments on Tuesdays and Thursdays just for Mamamia subscribers. To get full access, follow the link in the show notes, and a big thank you to all our current subscribers. Former lawyer and author David Gillespie has written a new book called Toxic at Work. It was inspired by his own workplace encounter with someone with sociopathic traits and his quest to understand those types of people and what to do about them. So, Mia, you've interviewed David Gillespie about psychopaths.
Yeah.
And now he's written this book specifically about what these people are like at work.
And these are the psychopaths, not like serial killer psychopaths. These are the psychopaths that walk amongst us.
Yes, and thrive in corporate environments. So he spoke on Conversations with Sarah Kanowski about his experience. This is some of what he said.
What were your first impressions of this guy when they arrived?
He was great. Absolutely terrific. He looked like he fitted in perfectly. He said all the right things. He believed all the right things. He seemed to have exactly the right attitude. There were instances where suddenly the message he was giving didn't match his behaviour, where he would do things that seemed to hurt the team or hurt individuals in the team or even hurt the interests of the business that we were in. And it was really hard to explain. You'd look at what he'd done and you'd say, why did you do that? Why did you attack that guy? And then what started to happen was people started to not trust each other in the team.
According to a clinical psychologist at the University of Technology, Sydney, Erica Penny, typically psychopathic traits refer to limited or no empathy or morality. She says sociopathic traits refer to having a sense of morality, but not one that's consistent with the morals of the culture. And she says there can be a few telltale psychopathic behaviours. One is a pattern of telling lies or misrepresenting facts. Another is limited regard for the human impact of their work decisions, only caring about relationships with people who can progress their ambitions, caring more about status and ambition than fairness or having collegial relationships. And one thing that really stuck out to me in this podcast that I think people might recognise from their own workplaces is that one reason sociopaths do so well in the workplace is because they make decisions incredibly effectively. And you will never know a sociopath to be indecisive. So one of the flaws of human beings at work is that we're faced with a decision and we're like, oh, I've got to consider all the factors and I'm really going to have to sit on this and I'm considering how that's going to affect this person and this person.
But that's an asset in a business.
Exactly. And that's how sociopaths get to the top. Because bosses go, oh, thank God, they're the best decision maker. And it's not necessarily they're the best decision maker. They just make decisions very quickly and don't second guess them.
Oh, that's a big red flag to me.
Yeah. And so Gillespie talks about what you should do when you encounter a sociopath in the workplace and why this interview and this book is so interesting and controversial is because he's like, absolutely do not challenge them. Absolutely do not go to HR about them because none of that will work. They're far too smart and manipulative. You just have to distance yourself as much as possible.
What if they're your boss?
From these people. Well, he's sort of like, don't tell them anything personal about that they can use against you. Just do.
No self-disclosure to a psychopath.
Absolutely no self-disclosure. Do what you need to do. Keep a record of things. Keep things incredibly black and white and don't engage in the way you'd normally engage.
Do you think the
with
word
a colleague.
psychopath is overused?
Yeah,
in the same way that toxic is overused to just mean something I don't like or someone I don't like?
Yeah, I'm very sorry if you've already said this, but what's the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath?
They're the same thing. Neither of them are actual conditions that appear in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's sort of called like antisocial personality disorder, but they are both observable.
What are their characteristics that they have
How
no
do I
feeling?
know?
No emotional empathy. So, for example, looking at a person who is crying, they don't feel anything and their brain doesn't light up. That's completely different to people who might be on the autism spectrum who, when they see somebody crying, do have an emotional reaction. It's just that cognitively something different might be going on.
It's true. Until the boss recognises what they're like and gets them out, there's no hope because they definitely manage your perception as a boss of everybody else and your perception of them.
Yes, they manage up incredibly effectively and don't manage down because they don't have to. So I reckon I've encountered one. Holly, do you think you've ever encountered a psychopath, sociopath in the workplace? Maybe you're the sociopath.
Yeah,
Sorry.
exactly. Now, that's what I'm thinking now
You're
because
not.
I don't think I've ever met anyone who doesn't think their boss is a sociopath.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I think
Interesting.
most people.
That's true.
Most people get upset that their boss isn't empathetic enough towards them because their boss's job is not to be empathetic towards them necessarily. Sometimes it is. It's to do the best thing for the business as far as they see fit, or, you know, tick off their KPIs or whatever it is. And so I know a lot of people who are like, that person's definitely a psychopath because I told them that my gran was sick and they still wanted me to do that thing or whatever. And that's not what we're talking about here, right? All right, I'm going to be really boring. I don't think I have. I mean, I'm sure I have. I can't think of an example of a time when I've been like, that person has no empathy at all.
You always see the best in people. And it's not fun for whinging purposes.
Sorry. Tell me I'm wrong.
So I had a boss once. It was very, very cutting comments, particularly that you're like, ooh, but would also play people off against each other, which was particularly manipulative. And that actually requires some thought. Do you know what I mean? To be like, this person's great, everybody be more like
What's the
this
difference
person.
between one of those and an asshole?
Yeah, and also can I put my hand up to say anyone who's ever done management training, and lots of out louders who'd be listening to this would have sat through several of those. The thing they tell you before anything else is you work out who your team are and then work out how to get the best out of them. Another word for that, friends, is manipulation.
Yeah.
It is actually your job to a point as a manager, as a boss, to go, what motivates Claire? What does Claire care about? It won't be the same as what her twin sister cares about and motivates her. And my job is to figure that out and push those buttons. Like, that's a very brutal way of putting it, but like work in the best way I can. Like if I'm being a good boss, which hopefully I have been, but to you play to your strengths and I get what I want out of you. In the most brutal terms, that is manipulative. I have like sort of semi-psychoanalyzed you with my like, oh, she's got a red brain or a blue brain or whatever chart we're using at that moment and gone, this is how I work, Claire. Like, is that evil?
Well, I think the problem is
Or inspirational.
that the people who like there's an empathetic way to do that
And then there's an asshole way of
there's a
doing it.
non-empathetic way to do that. And like Mia, you would say, and I know that as a business owner, the biggest thing is, and I remember having to think about this, sometimes decisions need to not be about people, they need to be about the business, right? A lot of the time they have to be. Normal people really struggle with that. Sociopaths don't struggle with that at all. So that's why they actually make great, you know, CEOs of banks
so
and that
that's
sort of
why
thing.
they can get quite high.
Yeah, because they're
That's
like, I don't
interesting.
mind making 50% of people redundant. That doesn't hurt my soul. Whereas
They're good at their job.
That's
in
why
that
I
way.
would be so bad at that. And I think it's why a lot of people, for example, really struggle with management, because you know that the thing that's getting in the way of being the most effective manager from like an objective
Is your
standpoint
empathy.
is your feelings.
Yeah, but a good manager, as we all know, can juggle that and work out how to get the best out of their team that's also good for them.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, in my crude example of pushing your buttons to get you to do what I want you to do, the ideal situation there is that it also makes you feel great because you're doing work you're proud of.
Yep.
You feel like you've got upward motion. You feel like you're being appreciated. Like in the perfect world, all these boxes are ticked, right? But that's quite hard. And I wonder if that's why, as you say, maybe if you're a sociopath, it's easier because you don't have to worry about ticking those other boxes.
Out Louders, we would love your stories of workplace psychopaths. They are my favourite. And I want full anecdotes because it's something I think a lot of us have encountered, and I just want all the stories.
My recommendation today is a little bit different. I know we've all been feeling helpless about the horrific images coming out of the Middle East. If you're a regular listener, you also know that we've been wrestling with ways to talk about it that feel useful. Here's one. If you're able, please consider donating to one of the charities that is working to get aid to those who need it most in Gaza. UNICEF works in 190 countries around the world. They are the world's largest provider of things like vaccines to kids in places where they wouldn't normally get access to that, delivering good nutrition and safe water and sanitation. That is their absolute bread and butter. And right now, they have an emergency campaign for Gazan children. They're on the ground working with local partners in extraordinarily difficult conditions. But whatever's happening now and whatever happens next in this conflict, they are very well placed to being at the forefront of the organisations who can get help through. So you can go to unicef.org to find out more. People are also donating to Doctors Without Borders. You'll have heard of them, Médecins Sans Frontières. They are an extraordinarily hard-working international and independent medical humanitarian organisation. They deliver emergency medical help to people affected by all kinds of things, armed conflict, epidemics. And their slogan is independent, neutral, impartial, funded by individuals like you. They also have an emergency appeal for the Israel-Gaza war, and you can donate to help support their extraordinarily difficult work at msf.org.au. Both these organisations are trying to get aid to those who need it most. The links to help are in our show notes.
And if you're looking for something else to listen to, on yesterday's Subscribe episode, Mia, Holly and I continued to work our way through the one and only Proust questionnaire. We each shared our idea of perfect happiness, the virtues we consider overrated, and revealed what our current state of mind is / are. It's not a lot of sunshine and rainbows, although Mia's was weirdly positive.
It was so positive.
It was good. And we also discovered that we're all a little bit dirty.
Yeah.
The link to that episode is in the show notes too, of course. Clare Stevens, we couldn't thank you enough for doing such an amazing job filling in for your sister Jessie, and you have been amazing. Everyone can keep listening to Clare, of course, on Cancelled and But Are You Happy? And we are sure that she will be back in this chair because, as you said, like, things are going to happen. Who knows what might happen next?
Jessie's a lazy girl. I'll be back.
Thank you, Clare Stevens, from all the Out Louders and all the team at Out Loud. We love you. Thank you for listening to Australia's #1 news and pop culture show. This episode was produced by Emeline Gazilas. The assistant producer is Tahli Blackman, and we have audio production, as always, from the lovely Leah Porges. Thank you. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Bye. Shout out to any Mamamia subscribers listening. If you love the show and want to support us as well, subscribing to Mamamia is the very best way to do so. There is a link in the episode description.